The piss poor Randy Newman cover would obviously be a real selling point on something like this. Now, I know it's hard to see the artwork, so Ed, can we get our scan of that up on the screen? There we go. Now, something about the condition of the artwork on and welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that nullifies the need for those 250 channels you've got on cable or satellite, because there's always something good on in archive land. Actually, come to think of it, how dare you watch anything else? But, of course, this wasn't always the case. I mean, once upon a time, you actually had to go looking for things to watch, on TV no less. I mean, how outdated is that? But, of course, initially you had the good old-fashioned paper TV guide, but, of course, this being archive, I think we're a little more familiar with the electronic scrolling program guides that replaced it, and, of course, in more recent years, the interactive program guides. But today I'd like to discuss something that you might not be aware of, and that is there was a pretty lengthy transitional period between those original scrolling guides and the current interactive ones. And so with that, today we're going to take a look at the 3 items that bridged these 2 eras. And those items are SuperGuide, StarSite, and especially VideoGuide. In retrospect, you'd think that with the rise of teletext technology in the 70s and early 80s, TV listings would have fallen pretty quickly into that world. So it's a little surprising that it took until the mid-80s for the idea to start happening. The first stab at an interactive program guide, henceforth IPG, arrived in 1986 with SuperGuide, which provided detailed TV listings via a then substantial 256 kilobit box to satellite dish customers for $40 a year. Within a few years, SuperGuide began to get built into some of the higher-end video cipher descrambler units like the Uniden UST 4800. To my shock, as best as I can gather, as of this episode, SuperGuide still exists, at least in name, as a guide for 4D TV viewers. Starting in 1990, California-based Insight Telecast began seeking partnerships with networks to allow them to insert, again subscription-based, TV listings and record codes, teletext style, into their vertical blanking intervals. It took until 1993, but Insight, now StarSite, began transmitting their TV listings via most PBS stations across America, or MTV or Nickelodeon for satellite users. StarSite's main goal was to build their product into TVs and cable boxes, or a set-top box. The set-top boxes, despite a strangely worded article I found, apparently never made it to market. However, some TV and cable box manufacturers did adapt the technology. Most notably, Zenith included StarSite on some of their higher-end TVs from 1994 to about 1997. In late 1996, Gemstar, the VCR Plus people, bought out StarSite. In 1995, VideoGuide Incorporated introduced the VideoGuide set-top box. VideoGuide was the most ambitious of these early program guides in that it merged the two worlds of IPGs and the early internet. The VideoGuide box would run between your cable service or just an antenna and your TV, RF only. Yuck. Anyway, VideoGuide operated like a pager. Remember those? However, instead of receiving, for example, just a simple phone number, VideoGuide would download a week's worth of detailed TV listings, record codes, and news and sports pages every day. Like Starsight, VideoGuide barely got started before Gemstar, yet again, bought them out in, yet again, late 1996. In the non-shock of the century, Gemstar proceeded to use the best parts of the technologies they'd bought out and began shopping their own Frankenstein IPG around to cable and satellite providers. It took a few more years, but the Gemstar technology ultimately took hold. Getting back to VideoGuide, the buyout was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to them. Between VideoGuide's rather demanding and sprawling system and their costly service, in upwards of $100 a year, plus the initial $100 for the box itself, it probably never would have caught on anyway. VideoGuide shut down for good in September of 1997. I've only ever found and acquired one of the systems that I've just discussed, but I think I found far and away the most Archivian of the three. So, a little story time here. Not too long ago, a viewer approached me with an episode suggestion / remembrance of VideoGuide, which, as I implied, he had had at the time. And he also mentioned that when VideoGuide got bought out, customers could return their equipment to the company for a refund. Naturally, this didn't exactly fill me with confidence about ever finding one of the units, but nonetheless, I went looking for one of the boxes and, shock of shocks, found absolutely nothing. So what I did was I just added VideoGuide, one word, to this list of automatic eBay searches that I keep, and lo and behold, a few days later, one turned up. And $50 later, here we are. So let me grab the main unit here. Which, by the way, takes an additional 4 batteries on top of the usual AC power. Anyway, as you'd well expect, these boxes are pretty much worthless in the 21st century. Without the service, which was first month free, by the way, and also everything was still sealed when I got it, so this was all new, but I'm off track. Without the service, to the best of my knowledge, there is no way of getting the TV listings or news items or record codes, any of the stuff. And despite this knowledge, I figured in the name of due diligence, and also in trying to fill an otherwise pretty short archive episode, I'd try to set it up anyway and see just how much I could access. What a pain in the ass that was. So anyway, let's give a little rundown here. At its most basic, VideoGuide can run either from a cable box or an antenna to the supplied signal splitter, which I have right here, which in turn runs to the VideoGuide box and the TV. Now, for the recording codes, you can add a VCR to the signal chain between the cable box or antenna and the splitter. Now, here's where VideoGuide starts to get really complicated. Unfortunately, the supplied remote for the VideoGuide is extremely limited, so let me show you that. You have got a whopping 4 buttons and a little thumbstick, and that's it. As such, you are still going to need your TV and or VCR and or cable remotes. And if you don't have them, you're screwed. And on top of that, you're also going to have to sync your remotes to the set-top box And that's because VideoGuide wants to control, all that stuff for the recording function. So let me just reduce this down to one remote. So to make all this stuff play nice, as I said, you have to sync your remotes. So to do so, you have to take your remote, put it right up against the box, touching, because apparently the sensor is a piece of junk, and you follow a couple of commands and just hope that it recognizes your remote. If not, you get to do a bunch of remote control gymnastics while still holding it right up to the box until it learns the basics of that remote, and that's all it'll ever learn. But unsurprisingly, that's exactly what I had to do with 2 out of the 3 remotes. Only my period VCR remote played nice on the first shot. On top of all that stuff, for all this voodoo to happen with your existing gear, you get to stick these lovely wired infrared sensors to your cable box and your VCR. And unsurprisingly, at 20 plus years old, the adhesive on these things is no more. So I had to just strap them on with good old Scotch tape. And also, the damn thing held me up when doing the VCR setup because it wanted to be able to override my VCR for the recording purposes, but it just wouldn't let go until I found a blank tape to stick in. So I had to go digging around for one, and I stuck this in, and the box promptly recorded 2 seconds of literally nothing. And indeed, when I went back to find at least the recording marks on the tape, I found nothing. But hey, at least it overrode the VCR. Now, when I did the initial setup of this, I wanted to be able to record what I was doing, partly for this episode and partly just for posterity. But this meant having to resort to quite possibly the most over-the-top signal chain I've ever had to come up with, certainly for this show. So when I first attempted this and got some sort of working signal chain together, I took a step back from it for a second and I realized suddenly the sheer absurdity of the whole thing. And so I took a picture at a distance of the whole setup just so everybody could see what I have to go through sometimes, just for seemingly minor tasks. And yes, by the way, I did get some stuff from VideoGuide for posterity. And so I'd now like to present a very, very heavily scoped version of the on-screen setup that I did when I first hooked all this up, which originally clocked in at 35 minutes. And as a bonus feature, when I got the setup finished, VideoGuide said that it needed to be left overnight to gather all its data, and despite having a real good idea how it was going to turn out, I figured, well, I've already got this junk out and set up. I'll just leave it up and on overnight, and I'll grab the results in the morning, which I did. And I will cap this little montage off with those results. And as I very heavily implied just a moment ago, no prizes for guessing how it all turned out.
it in the wilderness and the great outdoors.
Kathy, honey, come on, talk to me. Tell me all you did today. The fun you had and the jams you got into.
How'd you find out?
Find out what?
About me burning.
One another and your time together. Have some fun and celebrate.
Even if VideoGuide did work for me these days, I think I can safely say that at the time, and of course from what I understand, VideoGuide worked just fine at the time, once you got it going. And, but anyway, I think it would have gone belly up pretty quickly in its day, because as it stands, it just feels like an overpriced, overcomplicated precursor to another archivism, actually, and that would be web TV. But making this episode got me thinking, I'm kind of surprised that somebody didn't attempt some sort of interactive program guide slash teletext slash recording thing in like the early 80s. I mean, I think that would have caused some pretty serious waves had something like that dropped in 1982 or so. But, of course, archive, it's just one of those things we run into all the time. Had it come out 10, 15, 20 years earlier, it would have been okay. But, yeah, it's just one of those little archivian patterns, isn't it? Anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join us next time when I link together 3 VCRs, all of different formats, a Philips CDI, an Atari 7800, and a vacuum cleaner. Not for any sort of TV guide thing, just because.
VideoGuide is easy to install and easy to use. All you need is a TV.